Short Story 128, The Interview, Chapter 6. The next chapter is the last one in the story. Look out for it next time. Maya's heart lurched. Lucas and his goons had somehow tracked them down. Trapped on the mountain peak with a malfunctioning transmitter and a dangerous enemy, escape seemed impossible. Mr. Blackwood paled, his grip tightening on the manuscript. Edgar, ever the silent protector, stepped forward, hand instinctively reaching for the knife strapped to his hip. "Leave it, Edgar," Mr. Blackwood growled, his voice laced with a steely resolve. "We need a different plan." Thinking quickly, Maya scanned the rocky terrain. Below them, a steep ravine snaked down the mountainside, disappearing into a thick forest. It was a desperate gamble, but it might be their only chance. "We have to jump," she blurted, surprising even herself. Mr. Blackwood looked sceptical, but with Lucas closing in, they had no time to argue. "Hold on to the manuscript tight," she instructed, shoving it into his inner coat pocket. "I'll distract them." Before Mr. Blackwood could protest, Maya darted towards Lucas, drawing his attention. "Come and get me, you coward," she yelled, channeling her fear into defiance. Lucas smirked, his eyes gleaming with sadistic pleasure. "With pleasure," he snarled, beckoning his men forward. Taking a deep breath, Maya sprinted towards the edge of the ravine. The wind whipped through her hair as she looked down at the dizzying drop. There was no turning back now. With a leap of faith, she launched herself into the abyss. The fall was a blur of adrenaline and terror. Branches whipped at her face, tearing at her clothes. She landed with a bone-jarring thud on the soft earth of the forest floor. The breath momentarily knocked out of her lungs. Pain flared in her ankle, but she gritted her teeth, forcing herself to stand. She could hear the shouts and curses of Lucas and his men echoing from above, but she didn't dare look back. Adrenaline fueled her steps as she limped deeper into the woods, the dense foliage a welcome cloak of darkness. Suddenly a twig snapped behind her. She whirled around, heart pounding, but all she saw was a startled deer leaping away into the undergrowth. Relief washed over her, momentary and fragile. She knew escaping Lucas wouldn't be easy, but at least she had bought Mr. Blackwood some time. Meanwhile, on the peak, Mr. Blackwood and Edgar faced off against Lucas and his men. Despite being outnumbered, they fought with the desperation of cornered animals. Edgar's agility and Mr. Blackwood's surprising strength held them off for a fierce but brief moment. However, Lucas's men eventually gained the upper hand. They managed to overpower Edgar, pinning him to the ground with brutal efficiency. Mr. Blackwood, outnumbered and injured, was forced to surrender the manuscript. "There you go," he spat at Lucas, a defiant glint in his eyes, "but you won't silence the truth for long." Lucas, a cruel smile twisting his lips, ignored him. He snatched the manuscript and shoved it into his pocket. He then turned to his men, and a cold glint is in his eyes. "Get rid of them," he ordered, his voice devoid of emotion. Mr. Blackwood and Edgar exchanged a desperate glance. They were cornered, facing a grim fate at the hands of ruthless men. But just as Lucas's men lunged forward, a series of deafening cracks echoed through the mountain air. Startled, everyone froze. From the trees below, a lone figure emerged, a smoking rifle clutched in her hand. Maya, fueled by a surge of protective rage, had managed to circle back and find an old hunting cabin hidden within the forest. She had seen the events unfolding on the peak through the cabin window and knew she had to act. Lucas and his men, caught off guard by Maya's sudden intervention, faltered for a moment. In that precious gap, Mr. Blackwood lunged at Lucas, knocking him to the ground. Edgar, seizing the opportunity, wrestled one of Lucas's men to the ground, disarming him. The tide had turned, but the victory was far from secure. Maya, her arm throbbing with pain, knew they couldn't stay. With a final defiant glare at Lucas, she yelled. "Let's go!" They turned and fled down the mountainside, disappearing into the dense forest. Lucas, enraged and frustrated, screamed after them, but it was too late. They had vanished into the woods, taking with them the truth that could expose his boss's web of corruption. Exhausted and wounded, Mayor, Mr. Blackwood, and Edgar found refuge in a hidden cave deep within the forest. Though battered and bruised, they were alive. The manuscript, however, was gone. But even without the physical evidence, Mayer knew the story wouldn't die. To be continued with the last chapter next time. Vocabulary notes. Huddled. Curled up close to something for warmth or protection. Example, huddled in the dusty cave, the weight of their situation pressed down on them. Tenacity. The quality of holding firmly to a purpose or belief. Example, Mayer, fueled by a reporter's tenacity, wasn't about to let it disappear. Meticulously, in a very careful and detailed way. Example, they nursed their wounds and meticulously reconstructed the details of Mr. Blackwood's expose. Grueling, very difficult and tiring. Example, after a grueling trek they stumbled upon a small logging road. Bustling, full of activity and people. Example, the town, unlike the deserted one they encountered earlier, bustled with activity. Relief, a feeling of happiness, because something bad has not happened or has stopped. Example, relief flooded them as they stepped into a local diner. Confided, shared a secret or private matter with someone. Example, the waitress, a woman with a kind face and a weary smile, listened intently. Story written by Google Bard AI. Image created by desgo.com AI.